You're listening to Countercurrent, the podcast about business, family, and freedom. Hosted by Aaron Smith and Jack Hudson.
All right, we're back with episode 4. I've got this week's hot take, which is that the best person doesn't always get the job.
Oh, that's really good. How have you seen that play out?
Well, I think it's true not just for...
Well, first, all right, say it again.
Okay.
The best person
or business contractor does not always get the job.
Okay.
So I recently told some friends about this. I said, I have found that, yes, we always strive to do the best possible work we can, but it's not always about the end product. More than that, it's about being the easiest person to work with, taking things off their plate, being a team player, being easy to work with, super important. Or knowing somebody, right? That always helps. So I think that you know, I help friends try to get jobs, and I know that their resume might not be as fleshed out as some other candidates, but, you know, hopefully a great reference goes a long way and stuff like that. So that's my thought.
It's interesting. I think it actually dovetails well into the topic for today. I think there's also some that whoever comes in, either the lowest salary or the lowest bid will get it too, which doesn't always mean that it's going to be the best quality on the back end. I know that when I first started my business, I put a few bids out there that were lower than they probably should have been. One, because I had imposter syndrome. And so I wanted to get the work badly enough that I just came in underpriced. Right. And so I think that happens a lot as well. Yeah.
I mean, we've definitely done that where it's like, we'll make it work. You tell us what you can spend, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we want to do this. We want to get X, Y, or Z person on camera and whatever it takes. Or heck, let's just go film that event for free so we can be in the room, right? Mm-hmm. Because we desperately want the job, right? And I think that starts to die out as you get more secure in yourself and realize that not every job is a job worth taking. Knowing when to say yes and no is hugely important. Yeah, it's really interesting. Best person definitely does not always get the job. What I find is that if the first person doesn't do it well, though, people tend to reevaluate. Mm-hmm. You know, if the cheapest person winds up not working out, they tend to wind up spending the money. And then now they've spent 2 rounds of funding instead of 1. So that's really interesting. But I think it's something to note is that being a hard worker and maybe not coming in with everything on the table will get you really, really far. It's not about being bad at the job. It's about even a lack of experience can be made up for by hard work.
It's super true. And I think that I saw that play out a lot on the Hill. And that's a totally different environment, obviously. But the rule of thumb, you know, kind of is that there's 40 people outside the door that will do your job if you don't want to do it or you don't do your job well enough. And so there is somewhat of an imposter syndrome there because it does make you, most people, it makes you work harder than you may work otherwise.
Absolutely. I have this one great story from the Hill. One guy I knew out there, how he got a start in DC. I'm pretty sure he majored in physics or chemistry or something. And then he decided that he wanted to work on the Hill. So instead of applying for jobs and doing like a phone call interview, he just moved out there and slept on a friend's couch for like 2 months. Mm-hmm. And he went to the Hill every day and asked offices if they had a job until he finally got one. And he's been in the same office his whole career. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. Because I have a buddy that is thinking about moving out there. And he's like, I'm just worried if I go out there for an internship and don't get a job. I said, don't worry about it. Yep. You know, you have every day of lunch to go meet with somebody in a different office that might have a job.
Not only can you, but should you?
Yeah. Right? Like give it a shot.
And that's the way that the Hill works, unlike any environment that I've seen outside of DC, but also here in Indiana as well. It's super relational, but it's also about hard work too. And seeing those play in tandem is really interesting. I know I've told this before, but I went through, I don't know, maybe 40 informational interviews before I got my first job on the Hill. And to be clear, like my first job on the Hill was paid $28,000. It's not like you're making bank. Yeah. But the hardest part is getting into the system. And then once you do, then you're able to kind of figure out how to go from there and move up the field, whether that's staying in the same office or moving around House to Senate side or office to office.
Right. Yeah. And I saw that too. It's funny. Some people kind of stay and try to work up one office, and then other people bounce around and accelerate just as fast as possible to get that title or that job that they want. So that's interesting too, to see how different people navigate that. It's kind of similar to a corporate environment, but also not at all.
Yep.
It's weird because, like on the Senate side, they say it's 100 small businesses running with their own CEO and their own team. And you have two offices. You have your home state office and you have your DC office. It's really a unique environment.
They are kind of like little fiefdoms. I remember I was on the Senate side, but I remember there was a House member. God, I don't know if I hope this does not happen anymore, but there was a House member that made all of the females in his office wear dresses, right? Like there's nowhere else in the United States that you can dictate that.
No.
But the Hill is like its own little world where they have like their little tiny fiefdom, and they're able to operate the way that they want to, whether that's dress code or I don't think they have to follow OSHA policies or anything like that either.
That's wild.
They run their own ship.
Yeah. Well, and that was always interesting too, because some people could wear jeans. Mm-hmm. Some people can't.
Oh,
some can do it on a Friday.
That's a hill that I will die on. I'll send this to Dean Hinkson, who is my chief of staff in the Senate. I obviously worked out in DC pre-COVID. So it was a totally different world.
Yeah.
Hybrid work did not exist. You were there from 8 to 6, and you wore a suit every day that it was in session. And then the non-session days, you could dress down, which never, ever included jeans. Yeah. Now the House of Representatives is like the Wild West. I saw people walking to work with flip-flops and jeans on. Never in the United States Senate would that happen. But that was also under the reign of Dean Hinkson.
Yeah. Well, my rule is that if you're dressing up or dressing down, you can take one item away and add one. So like some people would walk into work, I'm sure, with just like slacks and a button up on.
Yeah.
My rule is you can ditch the slacks and go for jeans, but you have to add a sport coat.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it balances out.
Yeah, there you go.
That's my whole thing. And I think that like 9 times out of 10, it proves true.
Unless there's flip-flops involved.
Right. Yes.
There's never should you ever wear flip-flops to work?
No. Yeah. Now there's sneakers debate, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So. But let's dive into today's topic.
Yeah. So I texted Jack on the way in this morning, and I said, I feel like we need to talk about imposter syndrome. Sometimes we prep topics in advance. Sometimes we kind of shoot from the hip. And I think that I was in a one-on-one with someone who reports to me earlier this week, and we were talking about imposter syndrome and how it plays into our development, how I've seen it in my own life. For the person that reports to me, how it impacts him. And so we just talked through some of those things, but I think whether you own a business, whether you're in an environment like the Hill, whether you're in corporate America, or you're in a small business, imposter syndrome, especially now with social media, I think it's just rampant. So have you seen that play out in your own life?
Yeah. Well, one, I think it's important and good and in bad to have it. I think that it's sort of a milestone check, like that your body's telling you, how did you get here? Mm-hmm. And I think that's hugely important, right? I think learning how to embrace it and realize I should be here is huge, especially when you're accelerating at a pace you didn't expect or meeting someone you didn't expect. I don't think it's that different than being like starstruck, right? Mm-hmm. But it's kind of at yourself and where you're at. So on the one end, I think it's hugely important to take those moments and figure out, hey, how did I deserve to be here, right? And I think the problem with imposter syndrome comes in when you aren't embracing the fact that you can be here and you should be here. Mm-hmm. And that's where it causes a lot of burnout in people and anxiety and that sort of thing, which is challenging, right? When you genuinely think, no, should I be here, right? But we, of course, work with a lot of political leaders, and there are a lot of rooms. I've said it, I think, every episode. Most of what we've done has been we're in a room that we shouldn't be in is how we've gotten here. And being in those rooms every time, it's a little bit of imposter syndrome of, oh, who am I meeting with? I need to do my research. You know, am I dressed appropriately, right? Should I be wearing jeans to this? Like we just talked about, how should I hold myself? You know, should probably just treat them like a normal person, right? It's all those things. And I've been starstruck a couple times, right? First year of college, I got an internship on a Senate campaign. I thought that was my dream job for like life, right? And it's like, but I just started, you know? It's like, maybe I'll do a city council campaign. No, we're hopping to the big leagues and traveling the state right off the bat. And that was one of the first big ones, was like, wow, I have this job, and am I living up to it? Am I meeting expectations? And that was hard. It wasn't easy. And I did get burned out, mainly not because of the work, but because of the pressure I was putting on myself. And then I started to learn, one, everyone's a human and normal. Anybody you see on TV, at the end of the day, they're probably going home to their kids, or they're having dinner, or they're getting carry out, right? Everyone's a normal person.
They probably have piles of laundry in their house too.
Right.
They've got to figure out. Yeah.
Right. They might be dusty, you know, everybody's living their own life, and you just see maybe the part of it that's glitzy and glamorous, or that's hard, or that's broadcasted. And I think once you wrap your head around that, you realize that like no connection is unmakeable. No relationship is unattainable. It's just, do you click with somebody? And that goes from the top down to your peers.
Yeah, it's really interesting for me. I think when I was thinking through imposter syndrome for myself, in a moment of vulnerability, I've seen it play out in two ways, both in my business and with counsel. So I left the Hill, started my own business. There was a whole set of imposter syndrome with that, right? Thinking that like, I just came from the largest bureaucracy in the face of the planet, and now I'm going to run my own business. I don't know how to do any of this. So there's a whole set of imposter syndrome there. But a few years later, when I was thinking about running for city council, I never thought that I would be the guy. I was always the guy behind the guy. Yeah. And so for me, imposter syndrome really set in. I remember showing up to my first Chamber of Commerce lunch and to a networking event, and I didn't know a person in the room, right? And I was terrified that I know that I'm super extroverted, but I have a really hard time walking into a room that I don't know anybody in. That's not my natural gift. I freeze up. I'm not good in those settings at all. And so I remember sitting in that room where there was a ton of people from Noblesville that I should know. If I'm going to be on city council, I should know. And I remember that imposter syndrome setting in, like, there's no way that I can run for city council. I don't know anybody in these rooms. I don't know how this process works. I can't be that guy. And so I left, and I remember thinking through, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to put myself in the position for me to succeed. What does that look like for me? And so like my takeaway was, I need to figure out how to know more people in a room like that. I feel, while that's not my natural setting, one-on-ones is absolutely my natural setting. I love getting coffee with people. So I went through and I picked out 20 people that I know would be in a room like that. And I just cold emailed asking them to get coffee, because I knew how to do that from the Hill, right? Like I was equipped to do that. And it was funny to watch that evolution take place. So, 3 months later, I show up to an event and I know half the room because I've already talked to those people. And not only that, but then they can introduce me to someone else that's also in the room. So it just makes it that much easier. And then through that process, I realized that there are so many other people in that type of room that don't know anybody. And so then you can be the person that reaches out as well.
Right. And not only do you know them a lot better than you would if you said, hi, I'm Aaron Smith. Yeah. What brings you here today, right? Yep. You had an hour conversation with them and maybe learned some personal things about them and some professional things about them.
And that's why I hate networking generally, because I feel like it's so inauthentic.
Yeah.
Right. But getting a coffee one-on-one is absolutely authentic. Yeah. You get to know them, you get to know their kids, what they love, what they hate about their job. And so if you're able to lodge that in your brain, then it makes those bigger situations so much easier.
Absolutely. When I think another part of imposter syndrome is just like learning to have faith in yourself, right? Because that can be hard. I had imposter syndrome when we came and looked at this office and got it, because never did I think that we would go from college to office so fast, right? And even though it's not, the top floor of Salesforce Tower or anything, right?
It is the top floor of 44 North 9th Street.
That's right. It was surreal to think, oh, we have an office, right? And part of that is just learning to have faith in yourself and know when to say yes and know when to push back. And I think that's a huge part of it is you start to get over imposter syndrome when you realize that your idea or your ability matches what you're doing. So when it's leaving college and me and Emily going straight into our own business and telling people, no, this is what we're going to do. You can share your concerns, but we're doing it. Right. That was like the ultimate stamp of, okay, I feel very secure in what we're doing. And if we can't make it work, we'll figure out how to make something else work. And that helped me overcome things a lot. But I think it's learning that you have everything it takes to do something. But I found a stat, 70% of people experience imposter syndrome.
Wow. Interesting. I feel like those other 30% are probably lying.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because I think it comes in all different shapes and sizes. I think it comes for some people when you go to college. Yep. And you're there with now professors instead of teachers, and people that are 22 are in your class instead. And you're maybe 18 or 17 for some still. And yeah, I think it comes at all different stages of life though.
I think for me, when I try to figure out what my root is for imposter syndrome, and I guess it could be different for everybody. Like for me, it's the fear of failure and the fear of failure on a public stage. I don't want to do that. Right. There's some, and not that anybody wants to fail. But I feel like the faster you're willing to get over that, the easier it is for that imposter syndrome to get watered down. Because if you relinquish that fear and you're willing to move through either, whether it's business or any sphere that you're in, I think you're able to learn faster and then become more efficient and better at what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think failure is super important. And I think that's something that sort of academics across the board doesn't teach you it's okay to fail. Because, if you fail, you might have to retake a class or something, right? And I think what we should teach people to do is try this in your way, try it in a unique way, explain how you got there. And if you can explain how you got there, great. And then we'll explain why it's wrong and then move on and don't make the same mistake. But I think learning to embrace failure is like hugely important. I think that's the fastest way to learn is to mess up, because you don't want to mess up again. Like you said, messing up on the public stage is like, it's humiliating, right?
It's horrible.
And if you do it once, you're probably not going to make the same mistake again.
Yep. Well, and I for me, I think two examples of failure in my own life that I've witnessed firsthand.
Yeah.
When I was working for a client, I sent out a postcard. This was a $30,000 mailer. Sent out the postcard with the wrong date on it. I mean, like I wanted to stab my eyes out. Yeah. That was. Not only was that failure, it was money that wasn't mine at stake. And it went out to thousands of people.
Yeah.
Thousands of people. And I was mortified, dejected. This was, I don't know, maybe a year into running my own business. And I was like, I have no business running my own business at all. Like I can't even check a date on the postcard. Like I can't do this. And I'm grateful for two things in that process. One, the client that I was working with was totally forgiving, which was so gracious of him. Yeah. He found a way to leverage it and lean into it, which I was grateful for. And he told me a story when I shared it with him. He told me a story of how he failed and messed up early on in his career too.
Yeah.
And so through that process, there was a whole lot of grace, which I was thankful for. But also I learned, okay, I'm not the hot shot that I think I am, right? And so it does kneecap you a little bit. Now, every time I send something out like that, I get a second and third set of eyes, right? Because I walked in and I was like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need anybody to tell me how to operate and how to do my job. But there's some humility that comes along with that too, in failure. It can easily stop you. I could have easily said, like, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm just going to go take a 9-to-5 somewhere. Right. I'm not cut out for this. But if you're able to figure out how to flip the script and think through, okay, how can I use this really bad opportunity to make me better? Then I think it makes you stronger in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've had failures along the way. Some of them small, like sending a video for review and you're spelling a candidate's wife's name wrong. And you're like, well, that's not a good look, is it? Or the candidate, because auto captions do that sort of thing. And you think you catch them all, but you don't. And that's where you said second and third set of eyes is always hugely important. And Emily's a little more meticulous than me, so it's good to have her look through those things. But also, we filmed an event last year. We were taking photos and filming an event, and I lost the footage. And I was petrified. I was like, this seems like a big one. So I called the campaign manager and I say, hey, I'm really sorry, but we have the photos. I can pull something together from previous footage to put something out, but we can't find it. No worries. This one wasn't hugely important, so don't worry about it. We'll throw an event in next week. And I was like, the breath I took after that, it was huge, right? And then when I was first starting out, I hadn't filmed this wedding, but the guy I was working with had lost all the wedding footage.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Luckily and unluckily, we think that couple split up before they wanted the video back. So they never even asked about it. So that was, right, that was good for the footage, bad for the marriage.
For the marriage.
But yeah, I mean, those things happen, right? And the first time they happen, you realize that you don't want that to happen again. So
putting those safeguards in place is super important. I know that for me, imposter syndrome doesn't always have to be failure either. It can just be, what do you do in the face of a no? As a business owner, you get told no a lot. And figuring out how to keep going in that, I think is a learned skill, at least for me, that I don't have naturally. I needed to learn how to continue to push through when told no. Part of that running for council helps a lot because you go door to door and people slam the door in your face. You have really hard conversations. So I think that made me a better business owner. But I remember before I ran for council, before I owned a business, mentioned Dean Hinkson again, who is our chief of staff when I worked in the Senate. I was on the legislative team and I really wanted to go to the comms team. So I went in and I pitched him and I said, I think that we need this role. I think this is what I want to do. I think this is why I could do it. And I think this is why it would help you. And I felt like I was super prepared. I put on my nice tie that day and wore my suit just to make sure that Dean was happy with me. And he told me no. Yeah. And I was like, man, I felt like I did a really good job. And I could have easily stopped there, right, and just kept on in my role in the office. But I went back and I took a bit and I said, I need to find a better way to present what I know to be true. And so I created this memo that listed every single Senate office and how they were doing things better than we were. Some of it data and stat driven. At that time we were 94th or 92nd or 94th in rankings on some of our stats on social media. And it wasn't that those 6 to 8 were any better than us. I don't know. 4 of those did not have social media at all. Right. So it wasn't like we're even doing better than that. So I went back and I said, all right, I think that I I didn't do the best job that I could the first time. Here's the way that I think that we should go. These are the reasons why. And this is the data to back it up.
Right.
And that's when he gave me the chance to say like, okay, I still need you to do your job, but let's moonlight doing some of this. Let's test the waters. And obviously it just shot off from there. But I think that part of it, especially in a corporate or a government environment, even in a small business, you have to be willing to think outside the box and figure out how to maneuver through things, even when you're told no. If you really believe that it's something that you should be doing, don't let imposter syndrome kick in and make no the answer.
Yeah. And also realizing when no is okay. So we've had in the last year 2 huge bids we put out on jobs that we thought were surreal. Like kind of broke our brain when we got asked about them. One was to do sort of the short documentary that would have involved us interviewing maybe 4 speakers of the House. And that was surreal, right? And it seemed kind of like a shoe-in, and then somebody they knew was doing it who was based out in DC, which totally made sense, right? But we definitely had our hopes up that it was going to work out because it was like, we need it in a month. And that was surreal. But then we heard no, and we're like, okay, that's okay. And guess what? A bunch of work showed up that month that wound up being a lot more profitable. Sure, you don't have those people on camera, but it wound up being a lot more profitable month for us. And then another was for a surreal campaign to go work on a retainer basis. In that one, I called in every favor I had. I called anybody I know that was connected to that world. And it didn't work out because our price was high. But they said, how much would it take for you to drop what you're doing and come only do this? And afterwards, right, those mentors that we called in the favors with said, no, I think you're good that you position yourself there. You want people to take you seriously out there, and they know your name now. And that was a huge reassurance to us of this isn't, we shouldn't lower our price a bunch just to get the job, because it means changing our life, right? And do we want to do that? If it would have worked for that number, great. But hearing no, and I've been thinking about this a lot, really just this week. We've got a lot of cool, big ideas on things we'd like to do and business ventures we'd like to add. But at the same time, some days I think, let's do slow incremental growth to what we've got going right now, because it's going really well, and get that to a good point where maybe it's a little bit more automated than it is. And then let's tackle the next hurdle, because we love what we're doing, and we get better at it every day. And I think that's something else, right? It's like the balance between the tortoise and the hare. You want steady growth, but every now and then you want a great big leap or something to tout about. And I think learning that everything doesn't have to be a race, but when you have those moments, seize them is hugely important.
I think that's so good. I've said being a business owner, like you have to have a gene to do it. You either have the willingness to do it or you don't.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's something that you can be taught. I sleep with like a Post-it note beside my bed because I'll wake up in the middle of the night with an idea. And I think that it's really hard to decipher those moments that you were talking about. Like when you decide to take something at a lower cost because it'll put you in a room,
Right.
or stick to your gun, or fire a client because you have kind of outgrown them. Yeah. That's another imposter syndrome day that I remember is when I let my first client go because they couldn't pay the price that I needed them to pay to make my time worth it. And I never thought that I would get to that point. Right.
Yeah.
Now part of that's kind of like if you have a 9-to-5 job and you're like, I'm not making enough money. That's when you go look for a new job. When you're a business owner, I was joking with somebody yesterday. I was in my suit for counsel, and they said, it looks like you're out for a job interview today. I said, well, when you're an entrepreneur, you're interviewing for jobs every day.
Yeah.
You're constantly in job interview mode. But I think when you fire a client, or you say no to something, to your point, when it's not worth your time, that's really hard for me because it's like a multi-$1,000 check that you're just letting go by the wayside. banking on the fact that you know something
Right.
better will come down the road because you've seen that happen.
Right. And I think as you go there, because we're in that position where we're like at a good rate, but that's not attainable for everybody. So we're adding services that are at a lower rate, like filming in the studio or filming a podcast here, right? To try to make those services more attainable for more people, because one, we want to have those local connections too. And I think that's something that as you grow, you have to maintain that free work and reduced work still has value. And that's hugely important.
How do you pick when to take reduced work and when not?
Yeah. A lot of it's just based on passion. What do you care about? What do you feel good doing? And then what are those rooms you want to be in that aren't going to monopolize your time, but are going to help you get there? So whether it's helping X organization because they want to bring so-and-so in to film and now you can meet them and that sort of thing. If they're coming to your office and it takes you 2 hours, it's probably worth taking that time, or throwing in bonus services to help clients realize, hey, maybe you should be doing this. So sometimes that's cutting extra social media shorts out of video content we do and saying, hey, post this and see how it does. And a lot of times it works, right? And then next time around when we go to do a contract, that gets added in always. So I think that's one of the things you have to realize is, yes, it's okay to raise your price. And there's the old adage, double your price, have half the clients, right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But there's also still value in giving back.
Yeah, correct. And I think figuring out how to do that with boundaries. My kind of standard operating procedure is that I take on one pro bono client at a time.
Oh, that's great.
It gives me the ability to pick who I want to work with in that capacity. But then when folks come and ask me for help, I say, like, would love to add you to the list. I only do one at a time because I need that boundary in my own life. And never once has a client been mad that I do that. Right. But it shows them, wow, like he's got really good boundaries on what he does. It almost makes them want to work with you more. Yeah. One aspect of imposter syndrome that I think is true, no matter, again, what field you're in, is the way that social media impacts that. For sure. Because social media is just the glow up reel. How have you seen that play out for you, and how do you think it plays out in our society? Yeah, well, I think we're not nearly as bad as like my little cousins are, but Emily and I grew up with social media for the most part. And I think it makes you think, even when you're an adult, that life should look like a certain thing. It should look like a 3-row SUV with, plush recliner seats and a great big new construction house and this, that, and the other. And I think it's the same thing as what we started with. Those people are just human and they're showing the good parts. And this is where I get frustrated with people that say social media is so fake. And I'm like, well, would you put all the bad parts of your life on there? No. Yeah. And these people have done cool things or built systems that worked for them or built a business that allows them to do this. And I think you have to approach it with that mindset of what part of this is real, what part of this is, maybe taken out of context of the greater thing, right? Like you see people, saw this one couple, they're remodeling a house and they also bought an old church to turn into a wedding venue, and they're doing both, and they do cost breakdowns of all these things. And I'm sure that's stressful, right? They're not going to show it. They're going to say, here's how much it cost, and we're over budget, this or that. But I think you really have to frame social media with you are either seeing the best or the worst, and that in between gets lost all the time. Yep. The in between is always lost. And then you have to think, would you show your in between? Probably not. So, remove that from it. Like, there's probably crying kids getting in the car. There's probably this, that, and probably there are.
Yeah, right. Like, nobody is above basics of life. Yeah.
And the third row of your SUV has McDonald's toys at the bottom of the row.
There's fries between the seat. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you look in my car on the way here?
Yeah. So I think social media definitely influences that, and it makes you think you should be at X, Y, or Z thing. I think it's extra hard when you're young and coming up with that. I don't think that we were meant to have access to everyone. I still say, and I will stand by it, that I think social media does more good than bad. I think connection is a great thing.
That's a good hot take.
Maybe that's a whole nother
Yeah.
thing. No, I think it's great that we're all connected and can get real-time information. And but at the other end of the spectrum, I don't think it's healthy to be glued to it and inundated with it, which is something I'm bad about. If a major news event or something is happening somewhere else, I'm refreshing Twitter, just waiting for the real-time updates and checking trending and that sort of thing, because it's interesting and it's entertaining.
I think that you've got to have social media, but you also have to have in-person relationships too, right? Like after this today, I have a monthly check-in with somebody who's like my accountability guy.
Yeah.
Right. He knows everything that's going on in my life. He's the first one to to call me out if he sees me like in a bad mood, or that if I need somebody to gut check me on something, he's the first person that I call. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's so easy to get lost again in that world of social media where it's like everybody else's life is perfect. Right. No one else has trouble, fixing something in their house, or, getting the kids to school on time, or making ends meet from a business perspective. And to have somebody else say like, no, buddy, it's true for everybody.
Yeah.
You have to have those relationships with people that will help call you out and bring some levity to the rest of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the best way to put it, is social media is not a supplement for human interaction.
Yep.
And I think that that's just absolutely essential and what we've gotten away from. And I think that's a hard part. And I would invite anyone listening to send in their recommendations on how do we get back to that? How do we get away from somebody gets in line at the coffee shop behind you, and instead of talking, you immediately get on your phone because you don't want to have an awkward interaction, or the elevator, or this, that, or that. And now I found that I feel weird if I go somewhere without my phone and then I'm sitting just staring, or like wandering or drifting. And the people are like, why is he not on his phone or something? Like they think you're staring at them.
Yep.
I'm like, just don't have it right now, or it died, right?
Yep.
And I think that is a detriment.
Well, and this is somewhat of a tangent, but like having those like voids without your phone, I think is so crucial. I did not realize, this is goofy, I don't know, 6 months ago, there was a blackout. The cell service blacked out in central Indiana.
Oh yeah.
And I remember I was going to a client in Indianapolis, and I had a 40-minute car ride without my phone. Normally I listen to a podcast or music or something. So I'm like, what do I do? I can't call anybody. I can't listen to the podcast. Do I listen to the radio? Do I sit in silence?
Yeah.
But actually what was fascinating is there were ideas that flooded my brain when I shut off the noise. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, man, I got to figure out how to take this into my daily life, because I need this space in order to be creative and think and everything like that. And so now I do that. In the morning, I usually take 45 minutes. I don't have my phone by me. That's when I read the paper, the actual physical paper. And
your prop for the day.
Yes. Yeah. And that is honestly one of the most productive times of my day, because I'm not connected to everything. And so I think that's a huge part of imposter syndrome, is that you don't give yourself the space to like think and snap out of the daily rhythm of life, that you have to put yourself in those environments where you're able to do that.
Yeah. And I think I see so many of my friends that are like addicted to their phone, right? Like they almost have a panic attack if they don't have it. And anytime we go on vacation, or if we go out to dinner, I try to leave my phone in the car. We both do. If we go on vacation, as long as there's not expecting a call from a client or something, I leave my phone in the room the whole time. I'll check it when I get back from the beach, or this, that, or the other. Because to me, it is work.
Yep.
Like for the most part, my phone is work. Yes, there's entertainment to it as well, but it's taking up brain space.
Yep.
And it's stressing me out. And I saw, maybe it was like a Wall Street Journal video thing a while ago about the importance of silence. and how much it allows you to think, and how we don't get that anymore because there's music on in the coffee shop when you go there. You put something on in the car when you're there. You go on a walk and you put your AirPods in, like it doesn't stop. The noise does not stop. And it's like crucial for your brain to have silence, right? And I challenge myself, like I drive in the car without anything on a lot. And when I walk to work, nothing on. Like Emily will put AirPods in from here to our house, which as you know is like 5 minutes.
Yes.
I'm not about that. Like I like to listen to what's going on around me. And I think that's a good exercise for everyone is, if you're outside, turn everything off and see what sounds you can hear. This was one of the exercises, the video game. So like, listen to the birds, listen to the cars. Can you hear a pipe creak? Can you hear a truck? How many cars do you hear? Do you hear people talking in the distance? Do you hear wind chimes? And focus on all the things you're already hearing. Like there's not even silence when there is silence.
Yep.
And you don't need to be inundated with that all the time.
No, and it's funny. I have a conference down at St. Meinrad in April, and the folks that put on the conference warned us before. They said, like, if you don't do well with silence, you should probably bring in a noise machine to sleep because it's an overnight experience. And they said it's so eerily silent at night. So even the fact that we've gotten to that point where you can't even sit in silence. I remember I grew up in the country, and so I have no problem falling asleep in that environment. But I know my two kids, they sleep with the sound machine. Right? It's just the way that we are now. All right, so I think we should do two cases to wrap up on. So if there's someone who is listening that is just starting out in their career, and they feel like, man, I have so much imposter syndrome. I don't know where I want to go in life. I don't know how I need to go up the ladder. I don't feel like I even belong in the spot that I'm at. What advice would you give them?
As we said on week 1, no one knows what they're doing when they start.
Yep.
So I would say remember that and find a good mentor that will be your advocate. Because if they're willing to put you in a room or introduce you with somebody, when you have those one-on-ones and that person says, oh, let me connect you with 2 more people, that means they think you deserve to be connected to those 2 more people. So find your advocate, find your mentor, find your peer that will look out for you and remind you that you're heading in the right direction. And then, be confident in what you're doing, right? If you think you're good enough to do it and to chase that, then show that publicly. You don't need to. I understand that maybe in your car on your drive, you might be like, oh gosh, am I really good enough for this? But when you get in that room, I think you're good enough, right? Or at least present it, right?
Yep.
And that will get you really, really far.
And I think that's so true. And the idea of having, someone in your corner certainly helps. I saw someone put this really well where they said the difference between like a mentor and a sponsor. I'd never heard it framed that way, but she said like a mentor is someone that will like help you. A sponsor is someone that will talk about you when you're not in the room. And I was like, that's so interesting, thinking through like in my life when she was explaining it, I could think through who's talking about me in rooms that I want to be in that I'm not in yet. Yeah. And I know who that would be in my own life, but then it was kind of a gut check for me too. Is like, who am I doing that for? Right? Like, who am I talking up that really I want to kind of pull it behind me? And who am I being a sponsor for as well? Like I talked about on the Hill, there are plenty of people that want to help you. You just have to make the first step to establish that relationship. And people are always willing to talk about themselves. Yeah. So grab coffee with somebody because they're absolutely willing to be in your corner. Yeah.
I've never heard that comparison. And I think that's huge because I've had, I think 3 phone calls this week where they lead with, are your ears burning, Jack? And I was like, well, that's nice. And I think a sponsor might be better to start with than a mentor almost. And maybe that starts as mentorship and then they get real bought in on you and they become your sponsor.
And to do that for somebody else too.
Right.
You have to keep the thing moving.
And I think that's important is when you're meeting with those people, when you're first getting started, saying, how can I help you? Always. I have several mentors that I don't leave without homework ever. Help them write this, or I want your opinion on that, or hey, you're going to do this job for free and I promise it'll pay off. And I always do it, right? And you can't miss it. You got to be prompt on it. Those people are helping you out, and they're talking about you behind your back, right? In a positive way. And I think it's important to say no, like, please, what can I do? Yeah.
All right. The second one, and this is the one we can end on unless you have something that you want to add to it.
We'll see if I come up with one.
What, if somebody's always had this idea to open a business or start a business, but they're like, man, I could never. It's just that imposter syndrome that sets them back, either from figuring out funding, figuring out how to flesh out the idea, figuring out where to start with it. If you have imposter syndrome as a budding entrepreneur, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, of course, you don't have to quit your job to get started, right? And I think that's, I was actually going to bring this up, something else I'd love to talk about. I don't think either of us have ever had to take funding and investment and go down that path.
Yep.
And it's very daunting because we've had ideas that we're like, we need to raise $1 million to do something like that one day. And I think finding people that know more than you and asking questions and figuring out how much time can I carve out to pursue this thing, making actionable items and to-do lists, setting a benchmark. And then I think you have to set your out point on, this is when I'm going to give this 100% of what I've got. I think that's huge. You have to know when I'm going to give up the safety net and let it fall out from under me. And that can be, hey, I'm going to work in this job until I save X amount of money, and then I'm going to give this a shot. Or it can be, I'm going to work on this on nights and weekends. And that can be super hard because families and life outside of work, until I can make $3,000 a month from my side gig. Because if I know I can do that on nights and weekends, then I can probably double, triple, quadruple it out of the gate. So I think you have to give yourself forced guidelines. And I have a friend who maybe will come on here who was running his production company through college. And he had a great scholarship, similar position as I was in, but he was making great money through his business. And he knew he wanted to do it, and he knew he didn't like school, but he knew as long as he had the scholarship and had the option to stay, he would. So his out was he decided he was just going to fail classes so that he couldn't go back.
It's amazing.
So he pretty much just bombed for a semester and went and pursued his production company. And now he's absolutely killing it. I mean, he was killing it out of the gate. But I mean, not only is he getting awesome jobs and sending out great proposals, but he also makes time every year to just pursue a huge passion project that looks like a movie every time, which is fantastic. But that was his line in the sand. He said, I don't like it here. I love doing this. And the only way I get myself out of this is if I don't give myself another option. And I think at some point you have to give yourself that boot of, this is my only option.
For me, that's the bucket that I fell in. I knew that I could not do the nights and weekends thing. So I told Bronwyn, I said, like, I need you to give me 3 months. We're going to do rice and beans. We're going to barely make it through, but I need to pour my heart and soul into this to prove the concept to make it work.
Yeah.
And so I think that's huge. I think also the humility to be able to walk into those conversations knowing that you don't have all the answers, right? I had a really hard time admitting, like, I don't know how this works to run a business from the accountant side. And I met with an accountant and he tried to show me how to do it. And I knew immediately from the outset that this was not my gift. I'm going to pay somebody to do this. But having people in your corner that will help you in that process, there are absolutely people that will do it. But you have to put yourself in the position to say, like, yeah, I don't know how this works.
Right.
And that's sometimes one of the hardest steps.
Yeah. You can't do it all alone. Never. And you have to know where your weaknesses are and where, hey, I need to outsource this, or I just need help on that, or I need educated on that. And there's an element of that. And then there's the element of saying yes when you don't know something, and figuring it out.
Yep. So to wrap it up, I just to preview a few things, we've got some really good guests lined up that I'm really excited to start rolling out. So stay tuned for those. If you have imposter syndrome and you're trying to figure out what your next steps are, We won't attribute it back to you, but let us know. We would love to share more of those on social. I think that as that authenticity comes out, it shows more people that you're not alone. And so if you have those, please let us know, and we'd be happy to incorporate those and share them into what we're doing. But if you are on the process of figuring out if you want to start a business or, advance in your career, don't let imposter syndrome creep in. Like Jack said, there's 70% of people that say that it happens to, but really it's 100%. We know that everybody faces it. And so just lean in and keep going. And we can't wait to hear what your stories are in the process.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll see you next week.